However, what today does prove is that we can still communicate with each other despite these constraints. Now, my address today is titled An Unimagined Crisis, the Christchurch Mosque Terror Attacks, and the subtitle, which is really what I'm talking about today, is the importance of empathy in the aftermath of atrocity or indeed any crisis. Now, I'm hoping that somebody's going to switch to slide 2 now, because I seem to have managed to switch myself off the presentation, so I can't tell if you're switching to the slide 2, the face of crisis. And this is where I'm talking about the unimagined crisis, the atrocity of March 15, 2019. Despite Christchurch's experience of earthquakes, flood and fire, nothing could have prepared our city for the terrorist attacks that occurred here last year. And my first thought when I read on a colleague's phone that there had been shots fired at a mosque and that there were people dead on the ground, that it couldn't possibly be true. And it just simply wouldn't sink in. And I guess to contemplate such an act of terror perpetrated on a group of worshippers in their place of prayer, a mosque in New Zealand, let alone in Christchurch, would have been impossible. And that's why I speak of the unimagined crisis. We were no stranger to crisis, as you've already heard, but this was completely different. This event had no natural precursor, no earthquake, no storm, no fire. This was a premeditated attack on a community that makes up a very small minority in New Zealand, and there's no history of any conflict between us. In fact, for a number of our Muslim communities in New Zealand, we've always been a place of refuge from the threat of persecution from overseas countries. We represented a new beginning and a place of peace for so many. This act of terror was perpetrated by a man who didn't even come from here. He was from Australia and had moved to Dunedin just a few years before. He didn't even live in Christchurch. He travelled to Christchurch from Dunedin so he could inflict devastation on more of these others who he feared, and at the same time had managed to dehumanise with hate. New slide. We all said he was not from here. This is not us. But the truth is that they were empty words designed to shield us from the uncomfortable truth that he could have been from here. He could have been from Christchurch. He could have been from anywhere in New Zealand. He could have been from anywhere. His hatred was incubated in those dark places on the World Wide Web, where extreme misogyny, racism, religious intolerance, bigotry and prejudice add fuel to an already corrupt and perverted view of the world that would allow such a monstrosity to occur. Nothing prepared me for what I came to know about these places on the internet and the symbols and the messages that reinforced these so-called loners that they are never alone. Nothing prepared me for the realisation that there is an intention that sits behind these extremist acts, and that's whether the victims are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, people of colour, gay, human rights activists. The intention is to create division and to inspire further acts of violence and terrorism. Nothing had prepared me to be able to respond to the claims that were to be put to me about the impacts of white supremacism, overt expressions of racism and religious intolerance within our own city, the city where I was born and bred. Really nothing prepared me to hear about that. Crisis is not the time for self-discovery, but the truth is that my own skin colour has protected me from knowing the lived experience of people I have known all my life. And as I've truly listened to what people from a range of communities have had to say about the impacts of prejudice on their lives, I know that this is something that we do have to tackle, and we can only tackle together. New slide. Nothing prepared me for the international claims and counterclaims of retaliation. Even when we knew this couldn't be true, just seeing a further act of terrorism claimed in our name delivered another body blow to the city. And the so-called manifesto, just a carbon copy of the same replacement theory that has pervaded white extremist movements for decades. And the internet age has found a new following in those who have lost any sense of meaning in their own lives other than a deep-rooted sense of betrayal embodied in these others. And the anonymity of the internet has shown the capacity to embolden those who have otherwise felt completely worthless, giving them a new sense of identity and purpose, and ironically, a sense of belonging in what is a virtual world. So why do I dwell on this today? The technology that has enabled our conference is the same technology that has enabled this online manipulation, free from even the minimal standards of balance, accuracy, and fairness that act as a bit of a check on mainstream media. But even they have looked jealously, even enviously, at the following that social media attracts, robbing them of the advertising dollar they need to survive. Their online comment sections have become as toxic as other parts of the internet, with words and symbols sending messages that have been given meaning elsewhere. Even the mainstream amplifies the hate-filled rhetoric. So when we reflect on the conference theme of embedding best practice and communicating and engaging with communities, in the context of this toxicity, what has, that has allowed something unimagined to happen here in Christchurch? What does best practice even mean? How do we communicate in the wake of unspeakable horror when there are no answers to the most basic question? Why? Because there is no reason that can be found behind this travesty. There is no answer to the question, why? How do we deal with the conspiracy theories and the fake news that have filled the void where reason would otherwise reside? How do we engage with a community in a state of shock, let alone a marginalised minority community themselves, devastated by grief, angry, desperate, nowhere to turn? New slide. What advice do we give to those looking for something to do, to help, to reach out and to show them that we do care? And the cut through is founded in empathy. This happens when we can tell that whoever is speaking with authority knows exactly how we feel and understands and affirms why we feel this way. All the online trolls in the world cannot undermine this intangible quality, which by definition is authentic. We've all heard the expression, the secret of success is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you've got it made. It became part of George Burns's comedy routine for a reason. Authenticity, like sincerity, by definition, cannot be faked, which is why those seeking to undermine empathetic leaders go to extraordinary lengths to attack that single most important attribute in what is being spoken of as the post-truth world. The need for honest and effective communication in the midst of our present day crisis is as important as it was after the events of March 15 last year. So there is a common thread in these two stories, and it starts with empathetic leadership. New slide. The simple image of our Prime Minister wearing a headscarf, her pain and her compassion visible to all, captured the essence of empathy. She offered comfort and hope from a position of integrity. Her immediate responses reflected on what this meant to New Zealand and what it meant to the communities who'd been targeted. This is one of New Zealand's darkest days, she said. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They should be safe here. The person who has perpetuated this violent act against them, they have no place in New Zealand society. They are us and we are them. The response was instinctive and intuitive, and everything that followed had a firm footing. The visit to Christchurch the next day, where she shared the grief of the nation with the local Muslim communities, calling out the shooter as a terrorist, announcing changes to gun laws and enacting the ban on military-style semi-automatics before the gun lobby could intervene, as they did 28 years ago. Establishing a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the work of our security services prior to the attack. The Christchurch call, signed off by countries and tech companies, a significant step to the change we need to see in the internet platforms that can instantaneously disseminate extreme violence and hate. Every step of the way there has been intention. I remember telling one of the reporters that she had genuine empathy in her heart and steel in her spine. She wasn't afraid to show her emotion, and she was not afraid to make the hard calls. This is the leadership we need in a crisis. And as a city and as a nation, our immediate response, and it was backed up by her leadership, was to come together to support each other as we always do in times of crisis. The intention of the tax was to divide us as a city, but we rejected division. We came together in unity, as expressed from the tributes that came from the heart. The tribute wall grew every day. I think I may not have said to change the slide to show the tribute wall, which grew every day. And it was this that became the backdrop against which the world saw the news unfold. Images of trauma were tempered by the tributes, the flowers, the messages, the artwork, the toys. These expressions of grief and solidarity touched our hearts and hearts across the world, and it was to this that the world responded. In embracing peace, unity, love, compassion, and kindness, we collectively rejected hate and division. And new slide, please. And those who spoke for the Muslim communities did so with extraordinary resolve and grace, calling for peace, love, and compassion in the wake of all that had occurred. As Imam Gamal Fuda stated at the call to prayer a week after the attack, we are brokenhearted, but we are not broken. We are alive. We are together. We are determined to not let anyone divide us. The thousands of Christchurch residents that turned up spontaneously delivered a very strong message to the Muslims who had gathered there for the call to prayer. We are here in solidarity. We are here to support you. We've got your back. It was the most powerful expression of unity I have ever seen, witnessed, been part of in my entire life. New slide. And at the National Remembrance Service, we heard of an infinite capacity to forgive. Farid Ahmed, whose wife was killed at the mosque, said, "I want a heart that is full of love and care and full of mercy and will forgive lavishly, because this heart doesn't want any more life to be lost." And something tells us that this is how to respond to terrorism, not with retribution, but with generosity of mind and spirit as we build bridges between people and communities across the world. I have often reflected what the difference in the world might have been if this had been a different response to 9/11. New slide. And then I ask you to look at the Prime Minister's leadership in response to this global pandemic, which itself has been clouded in a wave of conspiracy theories that involve China, Bill Gates, vaccines and 5G, along with plots to suppress some evangelical Christian churches and deny people their rights and freedoms. The internet has no borders, so all of these play out here on the internet every day as well. Again, the Prime Minister's empathy is to the fore. Her daily media briefings with the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, established a strong platform for making government announcements that were backed by evidence and official advice. She was very clear about what was happening and why. Commitments were made to follow up on questions that couldn't be answered immediately. The level of acceptance of the ask she made of New Zealanders is the measure of the success of her leadership. And she has acknowledged that every step of the way. The team of 5 million, she said. New slide. So when we seek to embed best practice in communicating and engaging with communities, we need to remember that we don't do so in a vacuum. There are always theories available to fill any information void that we allow. And in an unimagined crisis, this is even more so when we don't know the terror whose dark places on the internet have been, we don't know the terror those dark places on the internet have been incubating. And the only counter to that is trust. And in a post-truth world, trust is really hard to gain and it's very easy to lose. And it is empathy that can lead the way. And that doesn't mean there are no mistakes made. No one is perfect, and yet our online demands us to make yes or no calls. You're either for us or against us, because the choice, that's the choice that we're given. You're for us or against us, but this never reflects the reality of decision-making in a crisis. There will always be time to reflect if things could have been done differently or better. And being open to that is actually how best practice evolves. we often learn more from our mistakes than what seemed to go right. And I again believe our Prime Minister has offered us a way forward. At the National Remembrance Service after the 15th of March shooting, she said, because we are not immune to the viruses of hate, of fear, of other, we never have been, but we can be the nation that discovers the cure. And so to each of us as we go from here, we have work to do, but we do not leave the job of combating hate to the government alone. We each hold the power in our words and in our actions and in our daily acts of kindness. Let that be the legacy of the 15th of March, to be the nation we believe ourselves to be. And to the last slide. And her words in Parliament in response to the COVID-19 crisis and the immediate impact it was having. She said this: "There is huge uncertainty out there right now, but one thing I'm certain of, we are a nation that has been shaped because of our experiences, and they often have been tough, harsh, and unpredictable. This is when New Zealanders are at their best. This is when we rally, when we look after one another, when we care for the most vulnerable. Be strong, but be kind. We will be okay." And people get that. There is a belief that we will be okay. And when we reflect on what happened in Christchurch, New Zealand on Friday, March 15, 2019, we know that the atrocity will never define us. It will never say anything about who we are. It is the response, the love, the compassion, the kindness. That's what we will be remembered for. That is who we are. And this is very much mirrored in the sacrifices made by the team of 5 million today, with an extraordinary leader who has shown us a better way. And that better way is in empathy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions here. The first is, after the terrorist attack, what was your local task to link to the national message?
I think that, again, it was instinctive, largely because of the experience that we'd been through after the earthquakes. I knew that because of our earthquake experience, that there would be a very strong desire for people to come together, to be together, and to offer support for each other. That was our experience in the earthquakes. The earthquakes didn't impact evenly across the city. We had a lot more damage over in the east part of the city, in the hill suburbs as well. But I was living in the east at the time, and the people that lived in the west on the firm ground that hadn't been so badly affected, they just flooded over our side of the city to provide support and help. So I knew that people would want to come together. I also had a sense that people would want to bring tributes, and I didn't want people to take those to the 2 mosques that had been impacted, because I knew that there would be a strong police presence there in the meantime. And so we looked for a central place for people to come to. And so we actually decided that that would be where it was, outside our Botanic Gardens, close to the hospital where all those that had been killed and injured were taken on that dreadful day. And so it had meaning for it. And as I said, it became a backdrop for how the world saw the response, and I thought that was very good. So it was very much a linking in with the leadership of the Prime Minister, that the city was really working very hard to reinforce those messages as well, but based very much on our experience of what happened after the earthquakes.
One last question. How is Christchurch doing now? Is the empathy still evident? Has that story been taken on by the community and being retold and retold? Has it wavered?
I think I probably would have been in a better position to answer that had we been able to come together to commemorate the first anniversary of the terrorist attack, because That, of course, was essentially put aside due to the changing requirements of the COVID-19 crisis, which was evolving at the same time. So my view is that Christchurch hasn't fully recovered from the experience that it went through, and I also don't think that we have yet fully challenged some of the underlying issues around white superiority issues, racism issues, some of these more challenging issues, and I see them playing out on the international media right now, which just shows that there is so much that sits beneath the surface, and there's often a lot of anger that sits beneath the surface that is exposed at a time like this. So I'm going to say that yes, there is overarching overall in Christchurch a real sense of community and a real still, I'm just trying to think of the word, but enormous respect for the Muslim communities and the way that they came together and the leadership that they showed at the time as well. And I do think that there is a strong belief that the response does represent who we are, not the tragic events of that day.